G'day, we're back in the office again today with another quick review, or as this one's probably more accurately described, it's a bit of an overview of something that's just hitting the market now in Australia, which is the Jeep Gladiator. The Jeep Gladiator is long awaited. It's Jeep's, certainly in Australia's, foray back into commercial vehicles. It's a new model. It's got a tub on the back of it. So the appeal here seems to be that you get the Jeep pedigree, you certainly get the Jeep signature looks with a tub back to capitalize on the extraordinarily hot ute slash commercial vehicle slash truck market around the world and certainly in Australia. So this has been hotly anticipated. It's out now. The reviews are starting to hit the press. And lots of people very, very interested in how the Jeep Gladiator holds up. The interesting thing to me is that this is squarely launched as, by Jeep's own admission, this is squarely launched as a truck. This is not a ute, it's a truck. Okay, and I understand the distinction there because this is an expensive bit of gear. This is basically Ford Ranger Raptor money plus on-road costs, which is about, you know, the sticker price for the Gladiator Rubicon is $76,490, which is effectively what you would pay minus on-road costs for a Ford Ranger Raptor. That's a lot of money. The Ford Ranger Raptor is the highest selling ute in that sort of range, if you call it ute, before you go to things like the Ram 1500, which is stickered in 3.5 ton towing configuration at $79,990. So by saying it's a truck, immediately expectations lift, and you're expecting to pay, you know, truck money, which is Dodge Ram, Ford F-Series, Silverado, and before I get that wrong, Ram 1500, rather than Dodge, hasn't been Dodge for years. Ram 1500, Ram 2500, Ram 3500, Silverado, the GMC, stuff like that. So by pitching it as a truck, it moves it into that category rather than in ute category, which is stuff like the D-Max, the Hilux, the Triton, Ranger BT50, the 3.5 ton tow utility vehicles in that segment, which are distinctly cheaper. And no matter which way you cut it, excluding the Raptor, which is specialty performance model, it's kept separate. So pitched it as a truck, changes the expectations, and principally, I expect, changes the expectations of what it's going to cost. And at $76,490, it's not cheap. And it's got a raft of options. Like, that's the base model. That's the cheapest way into a Gladiator. If you want to get into the top spec, you're paying a lot more. So that's one distinctive. If you want to pitch it directly as, it's a, you know, equivalent with a Ford Ranger Raptor, if you think that a Ford Ranger Raptor is especially equipped off-road, is that a competitor for it? Well, the Ford Ranger Raptor spec for spec is probably cheaper, really, than the Gladiator, because the Raptor is in its specification is spec'd up, whereas the Rubicon, there's a whole raft of different options that you can add to it. So one thing to get out of the way first, if you're interested in the Gladiator, you probably know this already, but it's petrol only. There's no diesel in Australia. Jeep have seemed to be fairly upfront about that so far, that there's not one coming. The costs to configure it for the Australian market are too high. It's not worth their while. Right-hand drive markets don't warrant the investment in tooling to give us the diesel, which probably gives you an indication of where it was designed to be sold. I would suggest, and all of this is only my personal opinion, you figure it out for yourself always. This is only as best as I can interpret the information, but considering that most of the utes, you know, trucks, utes, whatever, in Australia sold in volume, they're all diesel pretty much. All of the 4x4, 3.5 ton tows, diesel. The Ram 5500 Express is an exception. Its biggest selling variants in both Express and in Laramie spec are petrol in the Hemi, but you can get a diesel. There is a diesel option for more money, whereas the Gladiator is only going to come in petrol. So you need to know that straight up front, which is an interesting move. I do remember when manufacturers like Ford and Mazda offered petrol variants of their vehicles. They don't anymore. I remember when Toyota had a V6 petrol 4x4, it doesn't anymore. So there's been a shift away from it. Interesting to see Jeep first foray in to say we want a petrol, but I would suggest that's based on the markets that it's the right-hand drive markets that it's built for. The volume will probably be in countries like Japan, perhaps the United Kingdom, not Australia. Otherwise, if this was the principal market they were looking to supply, I would suggest they would probably have looked to make the right-hand drive diesel only rather than petrol only, but I may be wrong, of course. Now, with a petrol, you know going in that the fuel economy is probably going to suffer. And by the accounts of the reviews, it certainly seems like that is the case. And that's quite fascinating. One review in particular, which asserts that on their driving, they got about 17.5 litres per 100 kilometres. Now, if you compare that to diesel utes, that's bad. Like, there's no way to cut it. That's bad. My Hilux, for example, it gets about 11, and that's in combined driving. It's pretty regular on that. I'm not going to assert that it gets in single digits, because I've never seen it reliably in single digits. In combined driving, in everyday use, I won't see single digits. I'll see 11. But 17.5 is quite a hit. That's a lot of petrol per 100. There are some utes that'll do in single figures. I know friends who have utes that'll do in single figures. 17.5, that's a lot. That's a lot of petrol. And it's a 3.6 litre 6. So it's not like you're getting a big thumping V8 in this thing. Like, I know people, for example, who might buy the Ram 1500. I know people who have bought the Ram 1500 and they want the V8. They want a petrol V8. There's not an option from Holden or anything like that now. And that's a way they can get into a big fat burbly V8. Whereas with this, it's a 3.6 litre 6, 209 kilowatts, 347 Newton meters. It's fine. It's not exactly, setting the world on fire there, in my opinion, but it is what it is. That's the only option that we have. It's probably the only option forthcoming. I don't see 17.5 as particularly good. Even what Jeep quotes is 12.4. So 17.5, you're going to probably get off the sticker on the windscreen. I think the consensus is that very rarely matches the real world. So you're probably going to get 30% more than that realistically, maybe 20, but you're probably going to get more than that in real world conditions. So 17.5, I would expect that's probably going to be at least reasonably indicative. Probably, I don't know, but based on other experiences, that a very, very common complaint of new vehicles by real world owners is that they rarely seem to match their stickered litres per 100 kilometres. So 17.5, as from this review, is probably reasonably accurate. So that's not a great start in terms of both choice of engine and what you're going to, the penalty that you're probably going to pay in fuel economy by owning a petrol. That's not the big thing for me. The big thing for me is that this is a utility vehicle. It's a vehicle with a tray, and its payload is 620 kilos. That's awful. That is an awful payload. That is not an payload commensurate with a commercial vehicle. So let's have a look at, the two biggest selling Australian utility vehicles, which is the Ford Ranger Wildtrak 4x4 automatic. Well, it's not that's the top spec of the two biggest selling utility vehicles in Australia are Hilux and Ranger. The reasonable top spec bar, the Raptor, is the Wildtrak. The Wildtrak 4x4 Auto has a payload of 954 kilos. The Hilux, an SR5 automatic configuration, is 955. Now, I'm not saying that Ford sell the most Wildtraks of any Ranger, nor am I saying that Hilux sells the most SR5s of any of the 4x4 variants that they sell. But that's an indication. Hilux and Ranger are the two biggest selling utility vehicles in Australia, and both of them have a 955, they're at a kilo of each other, payload. The Rubicon is 620, and the Rubicon is the lowest spec. So if you option that up, you're going to add weight. Okay, so that's going to drop it below 620. Whereas these 954, 955, that's 300 and circa 35 kilos more than the Gladiator. That 620, I don't know what you do with that 620 kilos. That's how it comes off the shelf. And recently there's been some conjecture over many, increased scrutiny all the time on towing ability and GVMs. 620, I don't know what you do with it. So if you fit a tow bar and a bull bar, you're going to do 100 kilos there, circa. If you just fitted something like a canopy, there's going to be 100 kilos there. A friend of mine recently has put on a weighbridge, a new vehicle that he purchased. He put a canopy, he put drawers in it and slides, he put a fridge in it, redid his wiring, put a canopy on the top of it, put it back on the weighbridge again, and he done 300 kilos. If that was you with a Gladiator, then all of a sudden you've done 300 kilos of your 620 and you haven't even got anybody sitting in it yet. So if I took my family away, there's 5 of us, I weigh about 75 kilos, so I take me and the 3 kids, and my kids are young, they're all 10 years or younger. We're going to weigh circa 200 kilos. So there's 200 kilos done. I got 420 left. If I fitted a bull bar, if I fitted a tow bar, there's another 100. I'm up to 300 kilos. If I put a canopy on, I'm up to 400 kilos. And then if I want to chuck some luggage in it, if I want to, if I put drawers in it, if I put a fridge in it, if I put any other accessories on it, I'm going to be right up there on that 620. If I think that I'm going to tow a trailer when I go away with all that weight on board, I'm going to be gravely mistaken. So 620, I really don't know what you're going to do with that. And so it's a ute or truck. It's got a tub. So can a tradie use it? Well, is it going to be something for a tradie? Well, probably not, because what can you put in the back? Not much. You're going to blow that 620 in no time. I'm a farmer. Could I use it? No, I'm going to want a bigger payload than that. I have tonners for the most part, and I need that ability. Like if I want to go and pick up an IBC or a shuttle, 1,000 litre fertilizer shuttle, I can't do it with that. Fertilizer loads on a pallet, even if they're under a ton, they might come on a 700 kilo pallet. I can't pick it up in this. So I don't really know who it's made for. So if you said, okay, well, it's made for campers. Well, if I know campers, and if I go camping, they've got a lot of accessories fitted. They've got bull bars, they've got winch, they've got tow bar, they might have rock sliders, fridge, drawers. You add all that together and you're going to be right up on 620 kilos before you even stick the family in there. Like there's a lot of accessories. You're going to take water, you take fuel, all of that adds weight. All of it adds weight, and it's going to push you right up against that 620 really rapidly. To put this in context for you, what it seems to me is they've taken basically a 4x4 wagon, suspension, chassis, dynamics, and they've said, okay, let's put a tray on the back of it. We're not going to increase the payload. And what makes me say that is if you have a look at like a Land Cruiser 200 in Sahara spec, so the top of the line Land Cruiser 200, the heaviest Land Cruiser 200, that's got a payload of 610 kilos. And lots of people seek GVM upgrades because they find them insufficient. There's plenty of different people offering GVM upgrades for a Land Cruiser 200. 610 kilos. Even with Jeep, if you have a look in Jeep stable, look at the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Depends on which version you get. So go for something like a Trailhawk, so diesel 4x4, 609. So basically almost exactly the same as the Land Cruiser 200, which again is almost exactly the same as the Gladiator. So I don't know what advantage you're getting here. You may as well buy a wagon. Sure, you've got a big tray, but if you can't put any weight in it, what's the point of having it? You may as well just have a wagon and keep everything in the back of it. It's a very, very funny engineering kind of oversight here to have the payload so low. No doubt you've got a sprung rear end. It's got a sprung rear end, so that's going to take some of the ability to carry a decent payload out of it. But the current model Navara, it's got a sprung rear end. It's 3.5 ton towing. Has a payload commensurate with like the Ranger or the Hilux. It's got a sprung rear end, and admittedly, Nissan has taken a few series in their current model Navara to improve the rear suspension to make it better. But the reality is that the payload is far higher. It's a sprung rear end. This is way lower. So with that, lower payload comes not necessarily as a default, but certainly you have a lower tow rating. So the tow rating is 2.7 tons. And in this review, it's labeled as decent. Now, I would argue that it ain't decent. I would argue that it's not decent at all, because if you're buying a commercial vehicle, you've got to look at it to its peers. And its peers, if you want to say it's a truck, well then the 1500 will be 3.5 tons easy. It won't do 4.5 tons, even though it says that it will, in my opinion, but it'll certainly should do about 3.5 tons. If you want to go down to the other diesel utilities and say they're its competitors, well then all of a sudden you've got 3.5 ton towing in the D-Max, in the BT50, the Ranger, the Hilux. The Triton's a bit lower, but they all exceed the Gladiator. So towing, I don't know how you could say it was decent when it's below its peers. Now, you could say that the Ranger Raptor is its only peer. I suppose you could say that maybe. I would say, if you wanted to buy a series, if your priority was serious off-roading, I think if you're going to throw the Ranger Raptor in there, then you could equally throw the Land Cruiser 70 series in there, in which case, again, the tow rating compared to a Land Cruiser 70 series is way down. So is it decent? I would be more content to say it is below its peers, that its tow rating is below its peers and it has to take a hit for that. So just to recap so far, has to take a hit, no diesel option. It surely has to take a hit for not even giving you the option as a consumer to have a diesel. Has to take a hit for fuel economy, surely. It has to take a hit for its payload, for its bad payload. Has to take a hit for that, surely, 600 kilos compared to its compatriots. Even the Ranger Raptor has a higher payload than the Gladiator, I would mention, just in passing. It's not as much as the Wildtrak, but it is higher. And then in towing, it has to take a hit on that, commensurate to its peers, surely to goodness. The only exception is the Ranger Raptor. So interior-wise, I do quite like the interior. Exterior, the metal, like Jeeps generally look pretty good. I generally like the appearance of Jeeps. The interior looks quite nice. The reviews say that the interior is nice. The tech is very good. And that's tech as in infotainment and entertainment tech inside the cabin and drivability. Safety, some things are good and others are bad. We'll get to that. But in any event, that is generally seen as a plus in the reviews. And as I said, the pictures do look quite nice of the interiors. Now, in terms of off-roading ability, it's a Jeep. You would expect to have that built in. The general consensus is that it's pretty good off-road, pretty good to very good. The breakover angle is not great because of its very, very long wheelbase. So you want to take that into consideration. But it depends on how many times you're looking to bottom the thing out. Depends what sort of four-wheel driving you're doing. But it's got a really long wheelbase because it incorporates the tub. So the breakover angle takes a hit, and that is pretty well discussed in the various reviews. Not only does while I mentioned that, not only does it not have a diesel option, we also don't get the options in rubber and wheels that the US do. We get smaller wheels and different rubber to what the US spec does. But underneath it, said four-wheel drive capability seems to be very good. It's got Fox shocks fitted. So if if that rings your bells, that could be a distinct plus for you. They're expensive, so that coming off the shelf with Fox shocks, that may find you quite a positive. But again, the spongy, well, not necessarily spongy, but the sprung rear end is what I meant to say. The sprung rear end does take a hit, obviously, allows you to have Fox shocks all around, allows you to have a live front axle, live rear axle, but you take a hit on towing, and you also take a hit on the payload. Now, in this review here, it said that they put half a ton load in the back of it, and they said that it was pretty much at its maximum. It says you probably wouldn't want to run much more in a standard Gladiator with a half-ton load. Now, admittedly, this is a ute with a 610 payload. So if you're sitting in the driver's seat and you whack half a ton in the back of it, you're going to max it out. Because if you weigh over 100 kilos, then you're going to be over the limit. If you fit the tow bar and you wanted to put half a ton in the back of it, you're going to be over the limit. Fit a bull bar, same thing. So, but probably wouldn't want to run much more with a half-ton load. And in this review, it describes that as a solid pass. A solid pass? And it said that it wouldn't do any more in a half-ton load? Are you kidding me? My goodness, I would have expected that most things we should be kicking off in terms of load expectation in utility vehicles in Australia is plus or minus a ton. And that bears out with things like the Ranger Wild Track and the aforementioned Toyota Hilux SR5, that they're just shy of a ton in payload. 600 kilos and maxing out, you wouldn't want to put any more than half a ton in it. Obviously, the fact that they ran that test, that they put half a ton in the tub, shows that there is at least an inherent expectation in consumers that should be something that a vehicle should be able to do. That a vehicle with a tub on the back of it should be able to carry a load. And for it to be maxed out on its suspension at half a ton, that's abysmally bad in my opinion. You should have a commercial vehicle be able to do more than that. So anyway, looping back again to the fuel consumption. The Gladiator's fuel tank, it has an 83 litre tank standard. So if you take that and work that against a 17.5 litres per 100 kilometres, as the review points out, that you're not going to do any more than 500 kilometres in a tank. So you're going to have a pretty ordinary range. And they assert that, you might be able to push that out to nearly 700 kilometres if you can get the claim 12.5. I would humbly suggest, because I don't know what the reviewers did, but I would suggest that if I was reviewing a car and I had it for a week, as they assert that they did, what I would probably do is take it on a highway run to see, because that's generally going to give you your best fuel economy. On a straight run, it's constant speed, set the cruise control, that'll probably give you your best fuel economy. So I would say that if I was reviewing a car and I was trying to give good information to consumers, I would do mixed driving, and then I would I would top the tank, reset the trip computer, reset the trip meter, and go on a long drive. Might do a 500k loop, 250k's up, turn around, come back again. That'll only take you 5 hours. And then after doing that, top the tank again and work it out mathematically to see what the actual real world fuel economy was. The fact that they didn't do that asserts to me that they couldn't get what it claimed, because otherwise, why would you not do that? I don't understand why you wouldn't try and do that, why you wouldn't do a hot run to try and give it the best opportunity, that vehicle, the best opportunity to show off what fuel economy it couldn't get. So I find the assertion that, actually, if you could get what was claimed, you'd actually get better mileage and you'd get a better range, to be absolute nonsense. Because if you could do that, why wouldn't you have done that? So maybe it can get 12.5. There's nothing in any of the reviews that I've read that assert that it can. So, take that as you will, but I think it's a bit irresponsible to assert that you can probably get a better range at the claimed litres per 100 kilometres when you haven't been able to replicate that yourself. So, and I've driven cars with abysmal ranges, you know, sports cars and stuff that I've owned in the past. And look, you can take it with a grain of salt, but if you're doing it for your daily driver and you're just finding that you're filling up the tank all the time, it is a bit of a pain and is a real detractor. Like, it's not bad enough that it's going to cost you more in filling it up, but the fact that it also limits how far you can drive before filling the tank up again, it's another detractor. And I don't think you can take that in isolation. The vehicle's not crash tested yet. It's a derivative of the Jeep Wrangler. It's a derivative of that. They've used a lot of the, that's what it's based on. And they put a tub on the back and stretched it, There's more engineering in it than that, no doubt, but it is certainly based off the Wrangler, which has a 3-star crash test safety. And in this review, they say they don't hold out much hope for a very good crash test rating. They said, and I quote, "We don't hold high expectations for the Gladiator." So probably you're going to get a pretty ordinary crash test rating. And it does have AEB, it's got, but doesn't have pedestrian or cyclist detection. It gets rear cross traffic alert, blind spot monitoring, plus 4 airbags. Again, and that's just that 4 airbags. I would suggest that if you were doing a review, and as I've said, relative to its peers, that you would comment that 4 airbags is below the general market, with the exception of the Volkswagen Amarok, which is just, in my opinion, abysmally bad. That this far into the Amarok life, Volkswagen have thought so little of its consumers that it's only fitted 2 airbags to that thing, still trading on a 5-star safety rating. It got years ago when that vehicle came out. There is absolutely no doubt the Amarok wouldn't get a 5-star safety rating if crash tested today. But they're trading off the old ANCAP safety rating. It's got 2, but putting that to one side, this has got 4 airbags. That is below what many of the other dual cabs have. So Hilux, Triton, Ranger, BT50, they have more airbags. You know, you're pretty much expectation in utes, I would think, would be starting at 6. 4 is below the mark, and I'm surprised that's not mentioned. And it's not just this review. I've read a whole bunch of reviews, and the poor expectant crash test rating is usually mentioned, but you know, airbags are a bit below what the market should be expecting in 2020, I would suggest. So if we wrap all that up, I would pitch to you that on price, it's expensive. It's an expensive vehicle. Now, even if you pitch it against a Ford Ranger Raptor, if you're going to go like for like, you're going to spec it up to the top spec and then have the Ranger Raptor, it's already spec'd up, then it's going to be $10,000 more than a Raptor. So it's not exactly like for like. There are some features that the Gladiator has that the Raptor doesn't have. It's got removable body panels, a removable roof. What exactly you do with that, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know what the market is for, you know, a car that can have the doors removed, because, you know, there'd be extraordinarily few places that you could actually participate in that, and how many people actually want to take their doors off and lean them against a tree while they do some off-roading. I'm not exactly sure. But you can do it. It is a feature. Raptor doesn't offer that. It might have appeal to you. It doesn't really get me, but that's fine. It's only available in petrol. It has, relative to its peers, now that's excluding like the Ram 1500, because it has a V8. It's well in the teens to get in its petrol fuel economy. But relative to its ute peers, for sure, it has pretty ordinary fuel economy. And as a result, with the size of the fuel tank and the bad fuel economy, you've got a pretty ordinary range. You've got a 620 kilo payload. This is a utility vehicle. Jeep call it a truck. If it's a truck, if you were measuring a payload of a truck, and saying, we're going to review this truck. It's got a 620 kilo payload. That would have to say that is abysmally bad. If that's what you're claiming it to be, you know, if you claim to say this is a lifestyle vehicle, it's not to be used as a truck, it's not to be used as a ute, it's just lifestyle, that's all it is, maybe you could give it a pass. But with that tub on the back of it, it's pretty hard to make that claim. 620 kilos is pretty ordinary. Its tow rating is, again, it's below its peers. It's not 3.5 tons. It's below even Triton and Hilux manual, which have a lower than 3.5 ton tow rating. It's below that. I would argue that you probably can't use it anyway. If you put a tow bar, bull bar, a few accessories on it, put some people in the cabin, you're going to be at circa 400 kilos easy before you really whack any of your luggage and stuff in it. So at 400 kilos, if you want to hook up, say 2.5 tons of that 2.7, that's a 250 kilo down weight on your tow bar, and you've gone over your payload. It can't. I would suggest that across time and across circumstance, with this vehicle, given that it's going to be off-road, it's going to be that kind of segment is probably going to be who's most interested in it, that it's probably going to be fairly limited in its ability to do everything that you know off-roaders and campers want, because you're not going to be able to fit a heap of accessories. You're not going to be able to put a trailer on the back of it, like a two ton plus trailer, without exceeding your payload. I would think. I might be wrong, but I would say. So the safety rating's also expected to be pretty bad. It's got lower airbags than everything else. I would suggest that all of those negatives would take away from it having a really positive spin. But the reviews of this thing are absolutely glowing. And this is just one example, this review here from one particular online and print publication. It says the only things that I can pick out of it that says that it's a plus is that it looks good. It has good tech in terms of infotainment sort of tech, and it has a live axle coil spring and diff lock standard. To me, that's not really enough to coax me into it. Just those couple of things, considering all the other things on the other side. And yet they gave it a 7.6. 7.6 out of 10, yeah, it's not a 10 out of 10, it's not a 9 out of 10. But to contextualize it a little bit for you, let's have a look at what other vehicles are rated at. And let's have a look at the ute category, for example. So a D-Max, so the Gladiator is 7.6. D-Max, 7.3. A BT50, 7.4. A Navara, that's the D22, the current series Navara, 7.7, so only just a hair more than the Gladiator. And then what is like a Triton is 8, so that's a little bit. It's a fraction more, 8 compared to 7.6 for the Gladiator. And then what's generally the pick of what, not necessarily my opinion, but it seems to be in journalist circles, the pick of the current generation 4x4 diesel utes is the Ranger. It's about 8.3 for the FX4, which is the last Ranger that this particular publication did. So 10% better than the Gladiator. Now, I would suggest that if you had a vehicle relative to its peers that was petrol only, you haven't got a diesel option, and most utes sold in Australia are diesel, its fuel economy is way worse. Its payload at best is 2/3 of its competitors. Its tow rating is way worse. It's 20% worse at least. It's got a poor range for an off-road vehicle. 4x4, you're going to be out in the sticks. I would think that would be probably a bit of a detractor, that its range has some questions. Expectant, bad safety rating, and less airbags than its peers. And all of that adds up to something which is almost basically as good as everything else on the market. I cannot hardly fathom this. I really can't. These aren't reviews. These are press releases. These are media releases. This is basically advertising for the Jeep Gladiator. This is not an objective review, in my opinion. Now, you can have a different opinion. That's fine. And look, there'll be people out there that might really like the Gladiator. If you wanted to buy a Gladiator and you said, I'm not really going to load it up, I'm only going to be cruising around, I really like the look of Jeeps, I just love them. I think they're great looking vehicles. I think the interior is really comfortable. Yeah, the fuel economy is not great, but I don't really care. I just put fuel in it anyway. I don't care that fuel economy is no good. I just want to look really cool. That's fine. Lots of people buy cars for that reason. And that's perfectly, if it's as a personality extension, that's fine. But if you're going to measure it objectively on what it's designed for, as a truck, as a ute, because it's got the tub on the back of it, when you have a look at payload, when you have a look at fuel economy and range, if you have a look at safety, it's got 5 seats. So it certainly has the option of putting family in it. And when you overlay that with going, well, you know, the safety's probably not going to be great, has to take a hit from that, and yet is measured objectively pretty much relative to its peers. This is astonishing. It's actually quite an astonishing piece of work by automotive journalists to make the claims they have. This thing, by an objective measure, given the drawbacks that both journalists have highlighted and that they haven't, but have quite easily seen, you would have to rate this thing lower. You just would have to be, if you were being honest. And this goes to the heart of why we have so much of a problem with people doing things like going out and buying vehicles and then maxing out the tow and overloading their vehicles, because what they're being sold, if you read this and you go, oh, it says the tow rating's decent, 2.7 tons, that's good. And you think, okay, well, I only want to tow a 2.5 ton van. Yeah, okay, that looks good. Let's go get one. When you've missed the payload restrictions and the fact that it probably is not going to do it. If it's got half a ton on the back of it's on its limit, you're going to put 250 kilos down on the ball and then chuck everything else in there. That's the same payload by the time you're done, more or less, I would suggest. You're going to have half a ton in that thing, including the down weight on the tow bar. So it's going to be on its limits. Those sorts of things should detract from the final score. And admittedly, this does say that the payload isn't great. It does say that it does point blank say that the tow rating is 2.7, but surely you could go into more details about the perils of this particular vehicle and its ability to do what it's advertised to do. And that's the thing. As soon as you put a tub on the back, you're saying this is a commercial vehicle. I know lots of people who have been absolutely astounded that they've gone and bought a ute, bought a 3.5 ton, like a, you know, D-Max Ranger, BT50, whatever, gone out and they've bought a 3.5 ton van, put it on the back and then loaded the tub full of stuff going, oh, well, the tub's there, so it must be able to be filled. And sure, they should be more mindful of what their vehicle can do. I have no argument with that at all. But surely there is an onus on both dealers and the motoring media to draw people's attention to that so that they don't fall into that trap. But when you say the tow rating is decent and you whack half a ton on the back of it, there really should be a catalyst to say, you know, if you're putting half a ton in the back of this with me driving it, you can't put anything else in this. If you put a bull bar, you're over limit. If you put a tow bar on it, you're probably over limit. You're not going to be able to tow a trailer at all, and you can't have anybody else in the truck with you. You really should be saying that. But if you said that, I would suggest maybe that you would have to rate this thing down, because you all of a sudden you say, well, if you put half a ton in the back, you can't have anybody with you. If you fitted the canopy, a tow bar, a bull bar, a bunch of other accessories, slides, fridge, you probably can't take your family camping. You can't even probably put your family in it. Certainly can't tow your caravan. If you start saying those things, you're drawing attention to this thing doesn't seem to stack up great on paper, which is going to put people off the brand. As I said, when I read this, I just go, this isn't a review. This is a press release on behalf of Jeep, but just written by an automotive journalist. We have to get away from this. We really do, because there's people out there that are using vehicles beyond what they're capable of doing. I read a post recently on social media where someone said, why do I read so many posts about people seeking to do GVM upgrades? Just buy a car with a higher GVM. And that's a really good point. But if you don't look at it, if you just read a review, go, oh, tow rating's decent, and you put half a ton in the back, and that's all you do. And sure, the onus might be on you, but often you don't get a absolutely, let's say, objective viewpoint from your dealer. You can be led astray, and you do need to be careful about that. As I've said in other videos, we do need to, as Australian consumers, we do need to demand more from the automotive manufacturers and resellers and the dealers, and we certainly need to be asking more of our automotive journalists so that we can get articles that are actually going to help us in our decisions when we're looking to buy a new car, because this just doesn't. I'm sorry, but it doesn't, in my opinion. I thank you for watching. This was a long video today, but you do need, as a consumer, you do need to keep this in mind, because if you're using automotive reviews for decision purposes to help you decide which vehicle you're going to buy, you need to keep this sort of thing in mind, that you need to scrutinize not just the manufacturer and the dealer, but now you also have to scrutinize where you're getting your information from and whether the people doing the reviews are telling you things that are objectively true and accurate. Thank you for watching.